You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So this morning we're talking about the church as a mother. And while I have 2 children, I am not a mother, in case you didn't know that. Did you know I'm not a mommy? What am I?
A daddy.
A daddy, yes. But we have this book that we like to read in our house that's called Love You Forever, that is about a mother. So we thought we would read that for everybody this morning, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have my baby holding up so you can see it at the camera.
You have your baby too, yes. A mother held her new baby and very slowly rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she held him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The baby grew. He grew, and he grew, and he grew. He grew until he was 2 years old. Do you know anyone that's 2 years old?
Deacon, I am.
Oh.
And Say is 2 years old.
Say's 2 years old, okay. And he ran all around the house. He pulled all the books off the shelves. He pulled all the food out of the refrigerator, and he took his mother's watch and flushed it down the toilet. Sometimes his mother would say, this kid is driving me crazy. But at nighttime...
He's sweeping up top of the dinosaur.
But at nighttime, when that 2-year-old was quiet, she opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of his bed. And if he was really asleep, she picked him up and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. While she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The little boy grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was 9 years old. And he never wanted to come home for dinner. He never wanted to take a bath. And when Grandma visited, he always said bad words. Sometimes his mother wanted to sell him to the zoo. But at nighttime, when he was asleep, the mother quietly opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of the bed. If he was really asleep, she picked up that 9-year-old boy and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The boy grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was a teenager. He had strange friends and he wore strange clothes and he listened to strange music. Sometimes his mother felt like she was in a zoo. But at nighttime, when that teenager was asleep, the mother opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of the bed. If he really was asleep, she picked up that great big boy and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. While she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. That teenager grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was a grown-up man. He left home and got a house across town. But sometimes, on dark nights, the mother got into her car and drove across town. If all the lights in her son's house were out, she opened his bedroom window, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of his bed. If that great big man was really asleep, she picked him up and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. Well, that mother, she got older. She got older and older and older. One day she called up her son and said, "You'd better come see me because I am very old and sick." So her son came to see her. When he came in the door, she tried to sing the song. She sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always. But she couldn't finish because she was too old and sick. The son went to his mother. He picked her up and rocked her back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And he sang this song, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always. As long as I'm living, my mommy you'll be. When the son came home that night, he stood for a long time at the top of the stairs. Then he went into the room where his very new baby daughter was sleeping. He picked her up in his arms and very slowly rocked her back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while he rocked her, he sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The end. All right, good job, guys. Thanks. Now, can I have your babies to sit up here for the rest of the sermon?
I'll sit my baby up.
Okay.
My baby up. I'll take a baby. Bye-bye. Oh. Here. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Here. Hey. Hi. Bye-bye.
Hopefully you could hear everything in that book okay. I want to acknowledge before we continue here that for some of you, your relationship with your mother is a very meaningful relationship, a very important relationship. But for others of you, maybe you've never actually even met your birth mother. And maybe you don't have anybody that you call mom in your life. For others of you, maybe you've been adopted into a new family and the person that you call mom isn't the person who gave you birth. And maybe for some of you, you've had another woman or maybe even other women fill that mom role in your life, and you have multiple people that you think of as mom. Or maybe you have a mom and it's your birth mother, it's the person that raised you and you call them mom, but it's a painful or a difficult relationship. So as we think of this metaphor of the church as a mother, it's important to remember that a metaphor is an imperfect picture, but it's used to illustrate something. And so the point isn't about our relationship to our moms. The point is this ideal mother figure used to illustrate our relationship to the church. When Moses or Isaiah or Ezekiel or the psalmist or Jesus or Paul or John all talk about the people of God as a mother, they're not talking about your relationship with your mom. They're using this idealized vision or picture of the idealized picture of a mom in order to talk about what their vision is for the people of God. Sort of like the book that we just read for you is this idealized picture of a mom. It's kind of when we think of what a perfect mom would be like, driving in the dark with a ladder strapped to the top of her car to drive up into her adult son's room to rock him, singing, I'll love you forever, I'll like you always. It's our idealized picture of a mom, even though that's not what any of our relationship with our mom looks like. And so that's what we're doing this morning. That's what the Bible is doing, and we're looking at is taking this picture of the ideal mom, the perfect mom, that it's not about any of our relationship with our mom, it's about our relationship with the church. Have you ever thought about the church as a mother? In the early church, they quickly went from this picture of the church as the bride of Christ, which is maybe one that we're more familiar with and is played out more fully in the Bible. It's used about the same amount of times, but it just is developed a little bit more fully, this picture of the church as the bride of Christ. And they very quickly went from that to then also thinking of and talking about the church as the mother of believers. If the church is the bride of Christ, then the church also is the mother of those who believe. And so Cyprian, writing only 200 years after Jesus had been raised from the dead, only several generations removed from the disciples and apostles, said this statement: "You cannot have God for your father unless you have the church for your mother." And then John Calvin, writing over 1,000 years later in the Reformation, said something fairly similar. He said, "There is no other way to enter into life unless you have. There's no other way to enter into life unless this mother conceive us in her womb, give us birth, and nourish us at her breast. Away from her bosom, one cannot hope for any forgiveness of sins or any salvation." Some of you might be uncomfortable with this language or this concept of even thinking about or talking about in a sermon the process of a woman giving labor to a baby or nursing a child at her breasts. But if you're uncomfortable with that language, we find it also in Isaiah chapter 66. In verse 7 it says, "Before she goes into labor, she gives birth. Before the pains came upon her, she delivers a son. Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Rejoice greatly with her, all you who mourn over her. For you will nurse and be satisfied at her comforting breasts. You will drink deeply and delight in her overflowing abundance. For this is what the Lord says, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the wealth of nations like a flooding stream. You will nurse and be carried on her arm and dandled on her knees. As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you, and you will be comforted over Jerusalem." You know, I think sometimes maybe it's easier for us to latch onto the metaphor of the church as a body, which we looked at a number of weeks ago. You know, when we think about our bodies, sometimes there's ways we can think about our bodies that are uncomfortable. But when we think about the church as the body and different organs having different roles, you can kind of stay distant, and it's kind of a medical way of looking at the body. But we think about the church as a mother. It's much more intimate. Thinking about a nursing mother, about the bloody process of labor, even thinking about the warm embrace of a hug. Our culture for over 300 years has said that these are things that need to be hid behind closed doors. And while our culture that we live in today, Western culture for 300 years has said that, the culture we live in today, these things, it's an open debate as to whether women should be able to nurse in public, and people are having their labor and delivery places other than a sterilized hospital room. But still, for many of us, we think about these things, the relationship of a baby with the mother, which is a very physical and intimate relationship, is something we don't really talk about in normal conversation. But we have to realize that in Isaiah's time, there was no closed doors to hide behind. These were things that were out in the open, and they were actually valued. Rather than being seen as things that need to be hidden or put away, they were actually things that was lifted up as being good and valuable. And so if this imagery of a mother nursing her child or of the labor process makes you uncomfortable, I would encourage you to ask the question of why. What might God be inviting you to see differently in light of these passages? So we start with this passage in Isaiah 66, where God is making this promise to the people. I don't know if the babies are both going to be able to sit on the stool together. We'll see how this works. God is making this promise to the nation of Israel that despite their unfaithfulness, despite the fact that they weren't able to follow God faithfully the way He had called them to, which had led to hardship, it had led to pain, it even had led to their exile, and the question of whether the nation of Israel would even continue to exist. God says despite all of that, He will still use His people to bring about a new world, to birth a new creation. Essentially, this promise in Isaiah 66 that I just read for you is that even though the people have failed, and even though the people will continue to fail, that God is sufficient despite people's flaws. God is sufficient and will and wants to use His people to bring about His new world despite their flaws. You see, Israel was unfaithful and would continue to be unfaithful because of the curse of sin. But God promises in this passage not to birth something new out of his people, but actually to birth something new into his people. The birth of a new creation in Israel. You see, in this passage, God promises to break the curse of sin once and for all. The promise in Isaiah 66, 7 and 8, which I just read for you, that before she goes into labor, she gives birth. It's not just a promise that Zion is going to birth these new children. He's saying a country will be born out of her. It's not just a promise that his people, which Zion is supposed to kind of picture God's people throughout all time. It transcends time. Not just that Zion is going to give birth, but that it will happen with no labor pains. And remember, the curse in Genesis 3, the curse that is given after sin, is that women will have pain in labor. And so this idea of being able to give birth, being able to produce a child without ever experiencing labor, it says before she even goes into labor, she gives birth. Before the pains come upon her, she delivers a son. Essentially, the promise that Isaiah is making to the people of God is that God is doing a new thing in Zion. That God is working to reverse the curse, to undo the effects of sin, to birth a new creation in them and through them that will actually once and for all overcome sin and death and the things that plague us. Think about the pain that Jesus experienced on the cross. The physical pain in his body. The emotional pain of having his disciples, his closest friends, desert him in his time of need. The communal pain of the shame of being called a criminal and having people spit on him and mock him. The spiritual pain of bearing the weight of sin and actually being forsaken by God. This was the first pang of labor. This was the first contraction of the new creation, the new world that is coming into existence. In his birth, Jesus became the second Adam. In his life, Jesus fulfilled promises to David and to Moses and became this prophetic leader of the people. In his death, Jesus became the sacrificial lamb, fulfilling the promises made to Aaron and through the priestly line. In his resurrection and ascension, Jesus fulfilled the promises to David of always having an heir on the throne and the promise to Abraham of his descendants being as numerous as the stars in the sky, because after his resurrection, his ascension, his enthronement in heaven, Jesus unleashes the Spirit into the world. He pours forth this Spirit for new life, new birth to a new people, the new Israel that God has promised. Jesus fulfills all the promises of God made throughout history in himself. And in doing this, he birthed a new creation. The new creation that was promised all the way back in Isaiah is birthed in Jesus so that the people of God are now no longer just of Jewish descent. There now is a new Jerusalem, which we find talked about all throughout the New Testament. A heavenly Jerusalem, a kingdom not of this world. And so we don't look for a king to come out of, or a ruler to come out of Harrisburg to save us, or out of Washington, D.C. to save us. We don't even look for a new ruler in Jerusalem to usher in God's kingdom. And Christians have put their hope in all three places at different points in time and even now today. Looking for local government to be the answer to all of our problems, or federal government, or some sort of global government. But the hope for God's kingdom is not a physical location or any earthly government. All of us, all of creation, us included, are literally experiencing the pangs of labor, the pains of labor. the early contractions and middle contractions that are heightening as this new creation is being brought forth. That's what Paul says in Romans 8. He uses this picture of creation groaning in longing, waiting for the people of God to be revealed. And it talks about the pains of labor experienced in creation. The labor of this new creation started on the cross, and it continues in us, the church. We, as the mother of the new creation of God, the kingdom that He wants to bring on earth as it is in heaven, we are experiencing the pain of labor with Jesus. In Galatians 4, we see Paul connect both of these metaphors again, the metaphor of the city, the new Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, and the metaphor of the mother. Just like in Isaiah 66, where it's connecting Zion, the city, with Zion giving birth to a new people. And right in the middle of this section in Galatians chapter 4, we read this phrase. Paul says this: "The Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother." And as Paul, in the context here, he's referring to this new Jerusalem is a picture of the church. It's a metaphor, again, a different metaphor, which we'll get to later, of the city on a hill. But the picture of the church, the Jerusalem that is above, is free. And he says, this Jerusalem, the church, she is our mother. In the context, Paul's talking about the story of Ishmael, who was born to Abraham, but through Hagar, the servant woman in the Old Testament. He's contrasting Ishmael with Isaac, who was also born to Abraham, but through Sarah, his wife. And he's saying that he's contrasting Ishmael and Isaac, and he's comparing then also the church and Israel. Israel being in the line of Ishmael, born through law and compulsion, and the church being in the line of Isaac, born through grace and freedom. It would take a whole sermon or even a series of sermons to actually dissect the things that Paul is saying in that passage in Galatians 4. And you can go and look there and study there if you want. We can maybe look at it in the future. But the force of his argument, the point in all of this, when he's talking about Ishmael and Isaac, about Israel and the church, and he says the Jerusalem that is above is free and she is our mother. The point that he's making is that who your mother is matters. And remember again, now he's not talking about your relationship with your mom. He's not trying to make a point about how we relate to our moms. He's using the ideal picture of a mom to make a point. And actually, here he's not necessarily even doing that of the ideal picture. He's using the relationship of Ishmael with his mother and Isaac with his mother to make a point about the church and Israel. You see, for a first century Jew, who their mother was mattered. Because their life and their nature, who they were as people, but even their heritage as Jews was passed down through the motherly line. And so who your mother was mattered. Because all these things were passed to you through your mother. And so Paul then applies this to the church, the heavenly Jerusalem, our mother. And says that our community matters because we are shaped by it, because it's our source of light, of life. It's our connection to the Spirit comes through this community, our mother, the church. You know, it might be odd to think about the church in this bigger kind of universal sense of this heavenly Jerusalem. It feels so far removed, and how do we even wrap our minds around it? And to think of that church, that universal, bigger picture of church being our mother. It's easier for us just to think locally. We like to think of church as the people that we've known, that we can physically touch and see and know, and that have influenced our lives, which is also important. But the biblical understanding of the church is so much bigger than just that local sense. The church transcends time and space. We see pictures of the church being like an audience watching a race as we are running, and all of those who have gone before us, even the Old Testament leaders and followers of God through the Old Testament, as sitting and watching us as they're in the stands watching us run our race and cheering us on. There's this idea of the communion of the saints, which is the idea that when we gather in worship together, it's not just us gathering with one another, but that we are actually gathering with all those who have gone before us, who are right now in the throne room of God, already worshiping Him every day. And that when we gather for worship, we aren't just joining with each other, we're actually joining with all of those who have gone before. Those that we know, maybe parents or people that were important in our faith journeys, people that have influenced us, who have died and passed away, and people throughout church history who have been important and have shaped the thinking of the church and have served others and given their lives for Jesus. We join all these people together in this communion of the saints as we all gather together to worship. And this is the church. Not just me and you, not just Swamp Mennonite Church, not even our conference or people around the world today, but us joining with all Christians throughout all time and all around the world, singing together God's praises. This is the heavenly Jerusalem, working together to bring about God's kingdom here on this earth. This is the new and the heavenly Jerusalem. This is the church. And so Paul, here in this passage in Galatians 4, in the tradition of the prophets and primarily pulling off of Isaiah in Isaiah 66, talks about the church as an entity, as something bigger than us and outside of us. You know, it's important for us to understand that we are the church. But it's also important for us to understand that the church is much bigger than us. That while we all together are the church, that I am not the church. The church is bigger than me. And so what we see from this passage is that our spiritual mother matters. Your spiritual mother matters. It matters how you connect with God. And we connect with God together with others. We connect with God in community. There's a practice that I've learned more about over the years and has actually become more and more meaningful to me, and it dates all the way back. It actually predates Christianity. It was a practice that the Jews had and that continued into Christianity. It was this practice of praying the hours. There were hours of prayer, and so in Acts when we see the apostles going to the temple for the hour of prayer, this would have been normal times at 6 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, noon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock in the evening, and then before bedtime. That they would have gathered with others in order to pray. And this practice has looked different at different points in time throughout history and as it's come into the present day. But I really believe that for many of us, it's probably been lost in the last 50 or so years. I actually remember going to my grandparents' house, and at dinner time, my grandfather getting out his Bible and reading a passage from Psalm. And it was this practice of praying the hours. I wouldn't have had the language for it. I wouldn't have known why he did it in this way. But it was a tradition that's been handed down through millennia, over thousands of years. But unfortunately, I believe many of us in our families have probably lost this practice. But this idea of praying the hours is gathering wherever we are, with whoever we are with, in order to pray at the same time as others. Seeing the whole church joining together in prayer. And so in this time of being home a little bit more often and having more time with my children, we've been kind of reviving this practice of praying the hours. I have a prayer book, and if you have any interest, I could recommend some, and it actually will be in my Growth Matters article as well, talking about this a little bit. But this practice of praying with the church, recognizing the church is bigger than us, and joining with the church in prayer, not just praying our own prayers, but actually praying the prayers of the church. And so we've seen, and it's true, that Jesus is the only faithful one, that he actually fulfills what God promised to do through Israel. Jesus, the son of David, accomplishes all of those things. And that when we connect with Jesus, we connect with him in the cosmic, the universal church, the communion of the saints. Both of those things are true. But it is still also important than our experience in a local community of Christians. You see, in 1 Thessalonians, Paul turns to this metaphor of a mother once again to express how we relate to the church, even in a local fellowship. In 1 Thessalonians 2,
7 and 8, we read, "Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we love you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well." Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. We loved you so much that we were delighted to not only share the gospel of God with you, but our lives as well. You see, the church isn't just a philosophy club. The church isn't just a book club where we get together and read a book and discuss it with one another. The church, the local church, is meant to be an intimate union of people. A place where we share our very lives together in the same way that a mother shares her very life with her nursing infant. Think about that. And if you haven't been around, I know growing up, we were all born close together. There were no infants in the house when we were growing up. I would not necessarily have a way of understanding this, but Dana still, at this point, with Winslow being a year old, is waking up 2 to 4 times a night to nurse him, just during the night. There's this actual physical union of an infant and their mother on a daily basis, an hourly basis. It disrupts the entire life of a mother when she cares for a new baby. Paul says this is exactly how he related to the church in Thessalonica. He didn't come just to share the gospel with them. He knew that in sharing the good news of Jesus, he would give up everything and share his very life with them. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. The church isn't a philosophy club. It's not a book club. It is an intimate union of persons where we share our very lives with each other in the same way that a mother shares her life with her child. So we saw that despite hardship and unfaithfulness and pain and exile, God will still use his people to bring about a new world, and he is sufficient to accomplish that. We saw that our community matters. Where we connect, who we connect with matters, because we're shaped by our community, and our community is what connects us with the Spirit of God or with the spirit of this world. And we saw the church is not a philosophy club. It is an intimate union of people. So if you have been born again into this living union of people, through whom God is giving birth to a whole new creation, heaven on earth, what is your birth story? You know, our kids are getting old enough that they're starting to become interested in hearing these stories of why they were born. And you know, for children, or not why they were born, how they were born. the stories of their birth, and especially we've got some fun ones with Eulalia. We barely made it to the hospital, and Deacon born on the side of the road, and Winslow ended up being a home birth. And so we tell these birth stories. And for children that have been reborn into a new family through adoption, what they are able to know about their biological family, if they're able to know anything, becomes important to them to hear those stories and hear those details if they know any. But even more important, their story of adoption, their story of rebirth into a new family becomes even more important. It gives them a sense of identity, a sense of place. And so what is your spiritual rebirth story into the people of God, the church? Who guided your labor process as you came alive to the presence of God in the world and alive to your need for Jesus? And when have you experienced the labor pains of new birth? Who are you birthing right now in your life as you walk with them to help them to understand and grasp new insights into who God is and who he wants them to be? Who are you bringing new life to? Who are you guiding through the process of new birth? May we all learn and relearn to tell our birth stories. Indeed, this is what Jesus commissioned us to do, the apostles to do. He says, you will be my witnesses. You will tell the story of what you have experienced, witnessing to your new birth. And in this way, you will become part of the mothering church, bringing new life to those you meet.